Hello and welcome to your mini lecture for week 2. For this lecture, I just want to dig a little bit deeper into the adverse child experiences study that is referenced at the beginning of this module and dig a little bit more into the various domains of stress that are examined in that study. At the end of the video, I will give you some guidance on the reflection post that I'd like to see below. This reflection will really focus more on your own thoughts and opinions. I'm not as eager to see you go back and forth with one another. Of course, you're welcome to, but really this is more about your own reflection to this content. I will explain that more at the end of the video, but just to set the scene. So the Adverse Child Experiences Study, which we learned about at the beginning of the module, is a joint study between Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, which examined the correlational relationship between certain kinds of stress in childhood and chronic illness in adults. I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not causational data. So it's not to say that just because a child grows up in a home where there's emotional abuse or a neighborhood where there are higher rates of violent crime, that's not to say that that child is automatically going to grow up to be an adult with a serious illness. And I just think it's important to remind ourselves of the limitations of data and to make sure that we aren't internalizing this message of doom and gloom, that if we are subjected to things that we can't really control as a child, we're destined for challenges as an adult. That being said, it is worth taking time to reflect on the impact of chronic stress and major stressors like the stressors outlined in the ACEs study on child development, which is what I'd like to do just briefly. The ACEs study divides up stressors into 3 domains, which we'll just go through with a little bit of detail. The first domain is abuse, which is a concept we're going to be talking a lot about throughout this quarter. The first category, or the first experience within that domain, is physical abuse. I think this is probably where a lot of people's minds go when they're thinking about child abuse. It's one of the easier kinds of abuse to picture. So that's hitting, burning, causing physical harm to a child, breaking a bone, things we tend to think of as leaving physical marks on a child. Not always, but something that's a little bit more recognizable, as opposed to emotional abuse, which is the second form of abuse referenced in this study, which is a little more abstract, maybe a little bit harder to picture, and maybe a little bit harder to get traction behind as a mandated reporter or concerned adult escalating these concerns. This is the causing of emotional harm to a child by their caregiver. So this could be threatening words, bullying words, again, things that are a little bit harder to see, but can really do a lot of emotional damage in the long run. And then the third form of abuse that we look at is sexual abuse. And that really, we are just thinking about anything done to a child that is sexually inappropriate. I won't dig too far into that. I think this can be a really understandably triggering topic for people. And it's something that folks might not want to dig too far into. So if you are having a hard time understanding where the line is there, let me know. I'm happy to talk about it more, but I don't want to really just throw you in during week 2 in something that I think most of us can think of some examples about. The second domain that we talk about in this study is neglect. So neglect, again, as we will talk about throughout this quarter, is a little murkier. You'll find, if you choose to do this as a career, and if you end up in a position where you are escalating concerns through a mandated reporting line, that neglect is a little bit harder to paint a picture of as a whole. In terms of neglect, a lot of little things can really add up. And there's 2 sort of subcategories here, right? So we have physical neglect. So not feeding a child enough, not letting them have access to cleanliness, to adequate clothing, based on the weather to physical things to keep them safe. This can include medical care, and other things that help us meet those basic physical needs that are a caregiver's responsibility to provide for their child. The second subcategory in neglect is emotional neglect. Again, a little murkier, a little harder to conceptualize when you're trying to really highlight something as a risk. And this can be the withholding of emotional support. This can be failing to meet a child's mental health needs. These are a little harder to both to identify and to prove, although it isn't a mandated reporter's responsibility to prove abuse or neglect. You're still trying to show that something is concerning when you're reporting it, and this can be a little bit trickier. The third domain in the ACEs study is, I would say, a much broader domain, which is household challenges. So where abuse and neglect really focus on something that is happening to the child directly, household challenges really talk more about the environment in which the child is growing up. So the first subcategory in that domain is growing up in a household with incarceration. So this typically means that a meaningful person in the child's life is incarcerated, is in jail, or is in prison, either for a long time, sporadically here and there, even one time for a week can be really impactful. And there are a lot of different ways that this can show up for a child. This could be a sibling, this could be a parent, this could be a grandparent, this could be someone coming in and out of the home as they're interacting with the criminal justice system over the span of a long time. Second household challenge we look at is mental illness. This could be mental illness, again, of a sibling. That means that the child of reference isn't getting as much emotional attention. This could be mental illness of a parent, either that's untreated and causes that parent to withdraw, causes that parent to act unpredictably. That can show up in a lot of different ways. Substance use and dependence is the next one. We talked about that quite a bit earlier in the module, but that one's pretty, I would say, pretty self-explanatory. That could be just that there are substances in the home, and the home is in a safe setting as a result. That could be a parent that's regularly using substances and is acting unsafely as a result, or a parent that's spending all of their money on substances and therefore can't meet those physical needs. So you'll sort of start to see some of these categories blend into each other a little bit. The next category we've got is absence due to a separation or a divorce. This can look a lot of different ways, and I would personally expand this category a little bit to just be the separation of a child and their identified caregiver. So this could be that parents are going through a custody battle and one parent withholds the child from the other. This could be, parent coupling or a mom and a grandma who don't get along. And so one caregiver who had been really important to that child leaves the home. That can look a lot of different ways, but the impact is ultimately the loss of a really meaningful caregiver, and that impact will continue to impact this child's life. The final subdomain is intimate partner violence. Another phrase for that is domestic violence. And this can obviously impact a child in a lot of ways. The child could be on the either accidental or purposeful receiving end of some of that physical or emotional violence. That could just make the household less safe in general. In some of these relationships, one parent may be sort of cut off from the rest of the world by their abuser, which might make it harder for the child to get their physical or emotional needs met. That is absolutely a subcategory that can really ripple out through a child's experience of safety, but also of those other domains. So those are the 10 primary areas. So I'm just going to repeat them one more time, as you'll need this information for your reflection. So we have physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, growing up in a household with incarceration, mental illness, substance use, absence of a key caregiver, and intimate partner violence. So The reason I'm highlighting those 10 domains is because for your reflection, what I want you to do is choose one of those domains, and your post is going to be sort of three-pronged. This is going to be worth 18 points, so 6 points per prong. The first prong, I want you to just let me know which ACE you chose. Give me a brief explanation of how you see it impacting a child's life and potentially at various stages throughout their life. Maybe it starts as a baby. When they're a teenager, you kind of give me an explanation of how it can impact a child's life throughout their development. For the second prong, I want you to consider that if you were a service provider working with this child, how you would attempt to disrupt this pattern of stress. So get creative. If you have been doing this work and you know about some resources, you're welcome to throw specific resources out there. Resources you'd want to draw on, people you'd want to have come into the situation. If you don't have specifics, that's totally fine. I'm more than happy to just hear the kinds of things that you think would be helpful, whether it's a program or a resource or a person, really just what you would want to try to do to disrupt this pattern of stress. And then for the third prong, what I want you to reflect on is why it might be challenging to do any of the stuff that you talked about in prong 2. And I really want you to dig a little bit deeper in this third prong than just, we might not know what's going on, so it might be hard to intervene. If the child doesn't say anything, how are we supposed to get resources in there? That's all valid and true, but I want you to dig deeper than that. I want you to think systemically. I want you to think about what it would mean for the child and for their caregivers to be accepting of whatever disruptions you recommended in your second prong. And I really want you to try to think about this on multiple levels. So the interpersonal level, the systemic level, and kind of all the different domains of this child's life and how disrupting their normal might be challenging. Let me know if any of that doesn't make sense. If you're writing and you think you answered the prompt, but you're not 100% sure, you're welcome to let me know in your reflection, and I will reflect back to you on whether there's anything else I would have liked to hear. My goal for this, again, is not necessarily for you all to comment on one another's work. Of course, you're welcome to, but that is not a mandatory part of this assignment. My goal is really for you to reflect, and then I'm going to read all of these, obviously, and I'm going to respond to all of you. That's my baseline response when I'm doing these assignments, but especially for an assignment like this where I'm not asking you to talk amongst yourselves, I will always be sure to respond back to you. I may pose some additional questions for you. Again, you are not obligated to answer them. You're welcome to if you'd like, but I'd at least like you to consider if there's additional questions I'm asking you, if I may agree or disagree with what you have to say, and I just ask that you reflect on whatever my response to you ends up being. That is where I'm going to leave it for this lecture because we're getting a little bit long. If I'm hearing from multiple people that people are confused about the same part of this, I will be sure to post an announcement, and that goes for the whole quarter. If I'm getting a lot of messages about an assignment or about a resource not working, I will always post an announcement to let you guys know that I am aware and that I'm hearing it from multiple people. Also, but if you have a question, you're welcome to include it in your reflection, and then one of your classmates might know the answer. So I will actually leave it here, and I really look forward to hearing what you guys have to say.